Back to the Masters of the Universe Classics Director's Commentary. With me, your host, Scott, Toy Guru Neitlich, brand manager for the line, and we are continuing now to talk about the special 30th anniversary subset that was released in 2012. That was ideally supposed to be one figure every other month. So when we set out to do the 30th anniversary line, which I've mentioned in a couple previous videos, the idea was to recreate the emotional experience fans had in the vintage era of learning about and finding a character first as a toy, which is something very unique because with most toys you learn about them first from the content. And this is something very unique to Motu. And to create new characters to discover as a toy first, what I originally did was reach out to different individuals who'd worked on the brand in the vintage day to talk to them about creating a brand new character that we could put into the 30th anniversary line. Unfortunately, as I reached out to multiple people or got clearance through Mattel Legal about whether or not I could reach out, essentially no one wanted to do it. And my backup was to try to reach out to some well-known comic book artists or comic book creators, writers, artists, people who work in the industry. And again, outside of Jeff Johns, who was a huge Motu fan, no one was basically willing to do it for free. It had to be done for the love of Motu. And I'd spent so much time trying to track down different artists, different people who work on the brand, that upper management basically said, stop wasting your time and do it yourself. Just get people internally in the company who love the brand to make figures. People know who you are. You do one of them. Have the designer do one, the Four Horsemen. So under that direction, I had to scrap the original idea outside of giving one slot to Jeff Johns, who agreed to do it for love of the brand. And we'll get to his figure soon. But that's how one of the slots wound up with me. And when it came time to designing a figure that I was going to get to put into the Motu line, well, there was really no question in my mind that I was going to do my original creation that I had both sent to the Vintage Create a Character contest and used in numerous ways over the years. I really didn't have plans to make a movie about him, and I was fine with Mattel owning him. So we're talking about Mighty Spector, the character that I created when I was a kid. Here was the graffiti I did in my neighborhood where I wrote in wet cement when I was like 7 or 8 years old and put the spade next to his name with the backwards R there for Toys R Us. When I was a kid, my favorite line outside of Motu and Star Wars for action figures was Constructs. I loved Constructs. I loved building my own spaceships. I loved building things for lines like Transformers and Star Wars. And this was the original Captain Spector. He was the pilot figure that came with the Construct space set, and this was the character that I named Spector. His arch enemy was the alien from the series, and we're going to get back to him in a moment and his influence on Mighty Spector, which is probably a little obvious from looking at him from an aesthetic point of view. When I grew up, and, well, have I ever grown up? That's debatable. Ask my wife. But when I got a job at Mattel after college, or after I'd spent 4 years in pharmaceutical advertising, I brought Spector with me and named a Hot Wheels after him, and later on a Modifighter after him. And you can even notice the spade symbol on the side of the Modifighter there. I was a copywriter in Hot Wheels, and one of my jobs was naming all the individual vehicles. So I was glad to use the name Spector that I loved so much and the spade symbol. Later, when I transferred from being a copywriter on Hot Wheels to being the brand manager for Motu, well, actually, that wasn't a job. I moved over to the action group and formed Matty Collector. That was part of the reason I was moved, was because of that idea. And one of the items we released was this Royal Guard set, which came with tons of extra parts and heads. And one of those heads was sculpted to look like me. This is pretty common in the toy industry for people who work in the industry to have toys sculpted to look like them. The Four Horsemen have done it. Jesse Falcon's done it. And David Vonner, he's a War Machine in the old Toy Biz line. So when I was sculpted to be one of the 4 Royal Guard heads, I thought it'd be cool to name this character Lieutenant Spector, since Mattel already owned the name Spector from the Hot Wheels. Once you own a name, it's great to reuse it. Management likes that because then they don't have to pay for it again. When I did this, I had no idea that I was going to get to do a Mighty Spector figure. I figured Lieutenant Spector was my one little kind of signature on the line, and I was done. Well, obviously years went by and it turned out I got to do Mighty Spector, and I didn't want to create two different characters named Spector in the line, so I made them the same character. I basically said Lieutenant Spector became Mighty Spector. And of course that led to accusations that I was Mary suing myself into the line, meaning trying to put myself in the line since Lieutenant Spector had my face. I would have never done that. I would have never given Lieutenant Spector my face if I knew one day I'd get to do a Mighty Spector. This was definitely not this evil plot I had to take over the line and make myself the center of Motu. It was literally just, that's the way it organically worked out. I had no idea at the time of Lieutenant Spector with the guards that Mighty Spector was coming down the line. And, there shouldn't be two Spectors in the line. That'd be weird. All right, the other issue to address off the bat is the whole Deadpool similarity. So, yes, I get it that Mighty Spector's chest harness looks a lot like modern Deadpool's chest harness. But that was not the Deadpool that I knew. I know that Deadpool has had many looks over the years. They've all basically had the same red outfit. And it's only in recent years that he started having a chest harness with a red circle in the center. So this was not the Deadpool that I kind of grew up with. When I was a kid, this is what Deadpool looked like. It was the Rob Liefeld version. And he was basically just a guy in spandex with a face mask. So yeah, the fact that Deadpool now wears a harness that looks like Mighty Spector, it wasn't something I borrowed from Deadpool. I had Spector wearing his harness years before Deadpool wore it, but the world didn't know him. He was just in my head. So, it's hard to prove that, especially because the artwork I did of him that I sent into Marvel, is long gone, and I'll get to that in a moment. And yes, I also know that Deadpool eventually recruited a whole bunch of other Deadpools in different colors, including a purple one, but, again, I created Mighty Spector years before this. You'll also note that he doesn't have the Mighty Spector Deadpool harness with the circle in the middle, but hey, it's all about love, and if people want to see it as a Deadpool ripoff, that's fine. It was never my intention, and this is actually what he looked like. When I created Mighty Spector as a kid, it was more of like a cartoony character, if you will, kind of like a Looney Tune, where he wore a spade around his belt, and he could stretch his arms around his body, and he smoked a cigar and had cow horns, and these giant eyes with floating eyebrows. That S on his chest says the word Spector. You can work it out, but it's Spector, like told in one symbol. So this is what he looked like when I was a kid. When I first created Spector, or called him the Mighty Spector, he was like a wizard cow character. So as I grew up and got more into toy play, I definitely redesigned him, and a huge influence was that Constructs alien character. And was also Darkhawk, who was one of my favorite characters from Marvel. And you can kind of see the influence with the eyes, with the red there. And I actually drew up Mighty Spector using this as a template, this 1992 card series with the space background and the geometric shapes. And this is what I sent into Marvel as a submission. But as I know now as a professional, large companies like Marvel and Mattel and Warner Brothers, DC, can't take unsolicited material. It's not legal because then they could get sued. And I got this wonderful form letter telling me they got my idea and unfortunately they couldn't move forward with it. When I mentioned that he was rejected by Marvel, a lot of people were like, oh, it's such a terrible idea, even Marvel rejected it. Well, no, it's a form letter. Marvel rejects all unsolicited material. It had nothing to do with Mighty Spector. So the redesign, when I sent him into Marvel in the late 80s, early 90s, was basically the look he has now, where his eyes were big and red on his mask. This came from Scooby-Doo. Where are you? So those letters in the beginning with the way they were just somehow inspired the eyes. His belt, on the other hand, was also inspired by another, Warner Brothers character, which was Batman, specifically the 1966 Batman. I thought it was so awesome that he had this belt that could hold everything. And I thought, well, if Batman has one belt that goes around his waist, what if he takes that belt and has it like going up his chest and down his back? I mean, basically...
Now picture that, but everywhere.
So that's where the yellow harness and yellow belt came from. As far as him being purple, well, what can I say? Purple is my favorite color. It's always been my favorite color. I think it comes from when I was a kid, my grandmother gave me a purple Pegasus that I had on my shelf as a very young kid, and maybe that's what did it. All right, Ace of Spades. What's with the spade logo? I just think the spade logo is cool. I thought it was mysterious and awesome, and ever since I was a kid, you can see from that graffiti I did earlier in the video on the sidewalk, I just loved spades, and I thought it was a great symbol. I use it for my company now, Spector Creative. So, putting him into the Motu Classics line, Terry did some work with me, and we tried some different versions. First, we tried giving him furry shorts to make him look like a Motu character, but that just wasn't working. It was this weird mix of sort of technology and the furry shorts. I also had him with his laser whip and with boot jets, because I always thought he would have boot jets and fly around, and you could like snap those into the bottom. He went through a redesign. Terry gave him the Manny Faces shorts crotch piece, and also redesigned the controller on his wrist to look like the Cosmic Key. This was an awesome addition on Terry's part that really sort of brought him into the Motu world. And then you can see all the little power capsules in his around his ankle there, or his thigh, with one of them in the gun. So when the Horseman sculpted the figure, and I got to see him first, I think at New York Comic-Con, New York Toy Fair, wow, I mean, I was just blown away. Seeing this character that came from my mind as a figure, this was like one of the coolest moments of my life. Now, I really wanted to design him like he had been a vintage figure. Since we were creating new figures for the 30th anniversary, I wanted him to have the feel like he could have been in the vintage line, and discovered first as a character from the vintage line. And I was very conscious of that when we were using the shared parts, as well as the fact that his laser knife was going to be his action feature. We had to drop the whip because of tooling costs, but I insisted on keeping the knife. Well, actually, I got the choice, knife or whip. And the reason that I chose to keep the knife and not the whip, since I could only have one, was that the knife would have been his vintage action feature. It would have been like Wolverine with the pop-out claws. The idea was the knife would have gone in and out with a little lever. And the whip would have been kind of the extra part he got for being updated into classics. Speaking of being updated, when the Create a Character contest in the vintage line had some shared parts that it suggested people use, and after Spector was released, a few fans noticed that there were some parts you could put together that kind of looked like Mighty Spector, more or less. And honestly, I never saw this before, but yeah, that's kind of cool. It's definitely one of those coincidences. And it was cool to see some fans come up with what he could have looked like had he been in the vintage line doing some fan customs. There was also a Chuck Norris Karate Commando figure that looks really scarily like Spector, which I'd never heard of this figure until I did Spector, and fans pointed this out. So, hey, I'm not the only one creating purple figures with yellow belts going up and down. So there he was, part of the Masters of the Universe Classics line. I mean, to say this was an absolute dream come true was not even coming close. I never, ever imagined getting to do something like this and getting my name on a burst on the front of the package like that. It was a huge honor. The one big regret I do have is that I used the tagline that he was the heroic master of time travel. I think this contributed to the fact that people saw him as a Mary Sue, that I was trying to use a time travel character to rewrite history. But really, this was just an homage to the way the original line, or even Origins, every character is like the heroic master of something, of weapons, of, etc. What I would have done in hindsight is just called him heroic time traveling spy, because that more accurately describes what he is. There was no evil plot. There was no attempt to make him the new center of the brand or anything like that. In fact, that's why I actually had Illuminata kill him in the mini-comic, just to sort of prove that and be like, no, I'm not trying to take over the brand. We were just trying to add characters that would move the brand forward, and time travel was a great way to do that because it could connect King Grayskull's time with King He-Man's time, and Spector was a big part of that in the storyline. I'm really glad we did him, and hey, I treasure him, and a lot of people have told me they like him too.